What's up, everyone? Before we get in, we want to tell you that we're having a syntax meetup in Denver. You're going to want to come to this if you're anywhere near Denver, because it's going to be a hoot. May 29th, go to syntax.fm/meetup. You can grab your tickets for that. We've got syntax folks are going to be there. We got Sentry folks that are going to be there. We've got the Vercel crew. We got the Mux crew. It's going to be called Devs Night Out. It's going to be a hoot, so don't miss it. Welcome to Syntax. Today we have CJ on, and he's going to tell you why you should learn Vue and Nuxt. We had Daniel on, Daniel Rowe, to talk about a lot of his work on Vue and Nuxt. And CJ just put out an absolutely massive course, like almost 12 hours, something like that. What was that, CJ?
Yeah, it was 12 and a half hours if you include the hidden chapter. But yeah.
Oh my goodness. So that's on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/syntax FM.
Yes.
And the idea of this episode is we're going to kind of run through what Nuxt and Vue is, why CJ likes it, and how all the pieces work. And you're going to finish this episode. It's a real quick one. You're going to finish it being like, damn, I'm going to learn Nuxt. I'm going to go take CJ's course. So, welcome, CJ. How's it going?
It's good. Thanks for having me on. I am excited about Nuxt. I've been working with it over a month, probably close to 2 months now, just building with it, learning everything I can about it, and I like it. I've used a lot of meta frameworks. I've used all the meta frameworks. I've built stuff with Next.js and Svelte Kit and Solid Start, and I've been messing around with TanStack Start. And right now, Nuxt is my favorite.
That's a big thing to say. So
it is, yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know, Vue is the equivalent of React. You probably know that if you're listening to this podcast. And Nuxt is their meta framework for building full stack, client side, server side applications with Vue, both on both sides. It's similar. You can say it's like the Next.js of Vue. Is that fair to say? Absolutely,
yeah. And the similar thing about it is because it's also built on top of Vue Router, which is the routing tool that's used in the Vue ecosystem, a lot of people will choose Nuxt even if they're only building a single-page application. And so, yeah, Nuxt is their meta framework. You can build content-based websites, single-page applications, server-side rendered websites, multi-page websites, anything in between, and it supports the similar idea of these routes could be pre-rendered or server-side rendered, but these routes are always run on the client. Or you could build a fully pre-rendered website. So yeah, it supports all the different rendering strategies.
Like a full stack, yeah.
And you get to use Vue to build out your pages.
That's awesome. And why do you like Vue? Why is Vue better than Svelte or React or anything like that?
Yeah, it comes down to personal preferences, but I find that when I'm building things with Vue, I have to write less code than I do with React. They have a lot more things typically that are just built in that I don't have to reach for another library for.
Yeah.
And a lot of times things are just slightly more intuitive. Now, I guess if you've been in the React ecosystem for a long time, it doesn't matter if it's intuitive because you've just learned how it works. So you know how React works. But I find that if you just use your web development brain and you come in fresh to Vue.js, a lot of things just kind of make sense out of the box. There's no rules of hooks. You don't have to learn about functional programming or immutability. You can kind of just use what you know about web development, and then it just makes a lot of things easier. So that's why I like it. Yeah.
It seems to me like the very same excitement that I got when I first used Angular, the very first Angular, coming from the mess of jQuery that I was writing. And then I remember the very first time I used data binding in Angular, you have an input that was in there at the time. It was 2A data binding, which is apparently a big no these days. But I had two inputs, and you could type in either one, and then it was mirroring it to a paragraph tag on the page. I was like, holy smokes, this makes so much sense to me, and is so exciting.
Definitely. And when I first picked up Vue.js in 2015, 2016, that's basically how it was kind of advertised. It was the happy middle ground between AngularJS and React. Because even back then they were using the virtual DOM, but they adopted a lot of these directives that you had in AngularJS, like v4, it used to be ng4, or vif used to be ngif. So it's kind of you get all of these niceties of magic HTML things, but it's performant, it's built on top of the virtual DOM. kind of the best of both worlds.
And if you want to see all of the errors in your application, you'll want to check out Sentry at sentry.io/syntax. You don't want a production application out there that, well, you have no visibility into in case something is blowing up and you might not even know it. So head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Again, we've been using this tool for a long time and it totally rules. All right,
let's talk about routing, because I honestly think if you're building a web app today, you have to start with the router, because all of these things know about your data, they know about the pages, they know about all the endpoints. The router is like the nucleus of a web app. So Nuxt has a router, I'm assuming.
It does, and so it's actually built on top of View Router. And so
yeah,
I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but this is one of the other reasons I like the View ecosystem. Things are built in, and the View Router comes from the core team. And if you're not using Nuxt, you still would choose View Router if you were building like a single page application. But Nuxt builds on top of View Router to give you file-based routing and then also like server-side rendered routes. So it uses View Router. It allows you to do like programmatic navigation. They have built-in components like the Nuxt link, which allows you to create your links within your app that behave as single-page application links once they've been hydrated and rendered on the client side. And then it supports file-based routing because it's also built on top of another tool called, or another framework called Nitro. And so when you had Daniel on, he talked about Nitro quite a bit. And actually, that's one of the ideas they had when they were building out Nuxt is like they're doing all of this stuff that could be very useful to other meta frameworks as well, not just for the Vue ecosystem. So they pulled out those pieces and that became Nitro. And so now if you look at Tanstack Start, it's built on top of Nitro. If you look at Solid Start, it's built on top of Nitro. So all of those pieces that those frameworks now get to use that allowed them to hit the ground running actually came from the Nuxt ecosystem. Yeah.
The whole Nuxt ecosystem is building some of the best stuff out there, right? Like all the un.js stuff comes from people that were from the Vue, the ecosystem. Obviously, Vite is from the guy that made Vue as well. And it just seems that all of these new tools where it's just like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that you can deploy this thing to Node or to Cloudflare or to Vercel or to serverless. You can put it anywhere you want. It just works really well. And it's just a joy to use a lot of these new tooling. And that's honestly why I've been wanting to build something in Nuxt, because like literally everything else I'm using is coming out of this ecosystem. So probably they got this part figured out too.
I think so. And so that, like I mentioned, that gives you file-based routing. So you can create Vue files, which specifically become pages in your app. They also allow you to do like dynamic params, but they also support API routes. So in your Nuxt app, there is a folder called server, and you define all of your API routes in there. And those are actually built on top of a framework called H3. And Nitro is built on top of H3. But H3 was one of the first like runtime agnostic kind of like express replacements. Yeah. And so when you're building out API routes, you get to use those functions. When I mentioned the server directory, that's one of the other things that reminded me of what I like about Nuxt is this idea of conventions. So if you go onto the Nuxt documentation, then click on docs and then guide. There is a section called directory structure. And this lists out every single directory that you might have in your Nuxt app, but each one of those has its own documentation. So it has this idea of conventions where like if you put something in the composables folder, it's going to be something that is available throughout your app. If you put something in the components folder, it's available throughout your app. All of your pages go in the pages folder. So just like all of your API routes go in the server folder. So this is another thing I like about Nuxt is their conventions. It's not the Wild West. Like you could come across a Next.js app where they just put stuff anywhere they want. And they can because it's just JavaScript. But I do like that Nuxt kind of has some of these conventions where any one of these folders has the specific types of things inside of it.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that little bit of like magic is something that I often like. Would you say you're a fan of magic, or where's your line for how much magic you like?
I love magic. I understand people that don't, right? Because at a certain point, it could feel like I have no idea what's going on because everything is handled for me. But I have used Vue long enough, I've used Nuxt long enough that there are so many things I don't want to have to do. I don't want to have to do them by hand every single time. So I appreciate the magic that they give me because I know what is happening under the hood. But I completely understand that perspective of you come into this and you're like, where is all this stuff coming from? Why is there so much magic? I like it because I don't want to have to write all that boilerplate. And if you understand the magic, like if you do understand where all this stuff is coming from, then you can extend it. But that is a learning curve, right? If you do want to go in and kind of change the behavior of how some of the things that are magic, you are going to have to do some research to figure that stuff out.
In a lot of cases, you can also still duck out and get access to everything. I'm just reading the docs for the actual middleware here, where it's like, well, sometimes you do want access to the raw request and be able to do that type of thing. So it's nice to have those escape hatches. Waku is similar to that as well, where it's things just work when you get fired up. But if you do want to do some specific things, you certainly can duck out and write your own middleware or write your own plugin for it.
Do you know if Waku is built on top of Nitro or is it Vinci? Is Vinci built on top of Nitro? Do you know?
It's not. It's V and Hano all the way down, which is probably one of the only ones because it seems like a lot of these other ones are built on Vinci and Nuxt, or sorry, not Nuxt, Vinci, H3. All of these un.js parts. I can't even remember. I did a whole hour-long talk on like all these like standard pieces and writing like standardized modern server JavaScript. And I still can't even remember all of them.
Yeah.
What about data fetching? So how does that work when you're building a Nuxt app?
Yeah. So if you want to define calls to your database or things that happen on the back end, you're going to write those inside of your API routes. And so those go in the server folder and the API folder. But any API route you have defined in there has automatic type safety using their built-in composable called useFetch. So for any endpoint you define inside of your view page or view component, you can say useFetch. You're going to get type completion as to what endpoints are available, and it gives you type completion as to what the return type is as well. But one of the beautiful things about useFetch is it's isomorphic, right? It runs both on the client side and on the server side. So you can write one bit of code that awaits a call to useFetch that gets back your data. When that code runs on the server, that's going to server-side render the page. If you arrive at that page via like a client-side navigation, that request to the API will actually happen on the client side. And Nuxt is smart enough because of Nitro to see that if a request is happening to an API endpoint inside of server-side code, it just invokes that function directly in your backend. So your API routes can actually call each other, but it's not like doing a network hop. It literally figures out, oh, I'm already running on the server, so I can actually just invoke that other API function.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I was going to ask that because we'll talk about like React Server Components equivalent in just a second, but if you want to make custom functionality available, you stick it in the API route. But like, are you literally fetching from the same server? You know, and that's not the case. It just calls the function instead.
It calls the function exactly, and then they have utilities to include the incoming request headers, right? So let's say one API route needs to call some other route that is authenticated. If that request only happened on the server, it would include all the user's cookies and everything else. So if one route needs to call another, it can call I forget the name of the hook, but it's like use headers or get request headers. Okay. Attach those, and then the request internally appears as if it came from a user because it includes all their cookies and everything else.
Okay. And another thing I asked you before we started recording is like, is there the equivalent of like a RPC or React Server actions or form actions, basically being able to define a server function and call that from the client?
It's purely through their useFetch composable. So they don't have form actions or server actions. There is a community module where they've tried to figure out how to make these, but it doesn't exist in the core Nuxt just yet. Essentially, if you want to do data fetching, you define your API endpoint, you use the useFetch composable to call it, and that kind of gives you the RPC because you have type completion as to what the API endpoints are, you get type completion as to what's coming back from them, and those can be called from the client. So yeah, no actions, but this combined useFetch composable with APIs gives you an NRPC-like experience.
Oh yeah. I bet we'll probably see something similar to that in the future. Like Svelte just announced they're doing asynchronous Svelte, which is setting up so that we will be able to get both React suspense-like things in Svelte, but also a bit nicer of a RPC. Svelte currently does have the ability to like submit from the client to the server via, I think they're called form actions in Svelte. Is that right?
Yeah. Actions and loaders. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but right now they're tied to a page at a page level. So I bet that the new sync Svelte stuff will allow us to put those anywhere else.
Yeah. I would say if I had one thing to complain about for Nuxt, it would be the fact that all my backend code has to go in that server folder. So working in a framework like SvelteKit, your loaders can be defined right next to the page. And so that's a nicer developer experience. You don't have to jump around between your code base. It's just the file right next to it. In Nuxt, it's in that server folder. So if I had to complain, that's the one complaint, is I do have to bounce back and forth between my pages folder and my server folder. So that can be a little bit cumbersome.
Oh yeah. It is nice to be able to like have a folder for a component, and you can put your tests in there, you put your CSS in there, you put your client side code, your server side code, you put everything in that one folder, and that makes it nice and portable. Because you know where you're working, and also if you want to move that functionality, what it looks like, what it does, how it acts on the server, you can sort of bundle that all up into a single component or folder and move that to another project.
Yeah, and I will say, if you want to see some of this stuff in action, you don't have to commit to the 12-hour video. I also made a Nuxt crash course video. It's about 45 minutes, but I will say, if you skip to the 16-minute mark in the Nuxt crash course 2025 video I released, it shows you this useFetch hook. And one thing I'll point out really quick is how easy it is to get server-side rendering and also a client-side request of that data with just 3 lines of code. Next.js with server components comes to mind, because if you want that experience, you're going to have to duplicate some code, right? So for server-side render, you can await that request to your database or API or whatever else at the top level. And that will suspend that component from rendering on the server side. Once the data is available, it just ships back to the client what's needed. But what if someone needs to go to that page and they were already on your site? Right now, the only way to do that is to have, in Next.js and React, is to have a client component that has like a useEffect with a fetch, or maybe use something like TanStack query. So there's a lot more plumbing you have to do if you want to get that experience where if I go directly to the page, it's server rendered, but if I navigate here and I'm already in the app, that should be client rendered. With useFetch and Next.js, it's super simple. They have an option you pass in there called lazy. If you set lazy to true, it'll automatically allow you to navigate between all of these pages and then show a loading spinner if that request is happening on the client side. So they've figured that out. It's still very cumbersome to do in my experience in Next.js.
And let's talk about these like modules or core modules. So let's say you want to build something and you need like auth. Sort of the reason why a lot of people reach for the React ecosystem is there's a module for absolutely everything. And I believe that exists in the Vue and Nuxt ecosystem as well, right?
Definitely. And there are certain NPM modules that you could just install. It doesn't necessarily have to be Next specific.
It doesn't have to be the Nuxt version,
especially ones that are based on web standards, because it's built on top of Nitro, if you're thinking about like these backend things. But I will point you to the Nuxt docs. So if you go to the Nuxt docs, click on at the top integrations and then modules, just search for the thing that you want to exist. So for instance, if you search for auth, you can see there's a plugin for kind auth. There's like a hosted auth service. There is side-based Nuxt auth, so that actually uses auth.js under the hood. This page on the Nuxt documentation has community modules, but also like core modules too. So any kind of thing that you would want to do, someone's built a module, and the way that you install these is there's like a Nuxy add command. It automatically creates a config file for you if that particular module needs it. But in the course, I show how we use the ESLint module. So this automatically gets you up and going with a ready to go, well-designed lint config. I also use the icon plugin. So this uses Iconify, which lets you pull from like thousands of icons. I also used the color mode plugin, which gives you automatic light mode and dark mode detection that you can use to like plug into like a theme switcher.
Yep.
There's an images module similar to how Next.js has their like image optimization module. So like I said, just go here and search, and someone's probably already created a module that just makes it immediately available to use inside of Nuxt.
And for all the like, you think, okay, I'm building an application, right? You have your modules and whatnot. There's also equivalents of like UI components, data stores. The Vue ecosystem is like mature, right? There's equivalents and in many cases better versions of what we have in other frameworks.
I would agree with that. And I think same thing, pick any UI framework that you use with React. You can find an equivalent that's well supported and has a good community in the Nuxt ecosystem.
Even like a ShadCN,
Yeah,
there's a
if you
Vue
search
version.
for a Vue ShadCN, they're making it happen. And there's a ShadCN-Nuxt plugin that automatically sets it up so it's usable inside of your Nuxt app. And of course, there are UI frameworks like specific to the ecosystem. There's a framework specifically called Nuxt UI that looks really nice. In the course, I actually use Daisy UI. So Daisy UI is just a Tailwind CSS framework. So it can be used with anything, and I was able to use it inside of my Nuxt app.
Awesome. And Syntax sponsored this one. How do you say it?
Pinia.
Yeah, that's a data store, right?
Exactly. So I didn't get to talk about that, but that in the world of Vue.js, if you need global state management, if you need a store, everyone reaches for Pinia. There's not 20 choices. There's not a lot of bike shedding around that. If you need global state, we use Pinia. And in the course, I use Pinia. There's a Pinia Nuxt module that gets everything set up for you. And it's really nice because in the world of Vue, they moved to this idea of the composition API, where you have all of these small functions similar to hooks, but without all the rules of hooks in React that let you create state variables, create reusable state functions. And Pinia just works on top of those as well. So if you're already used to all of the composables in Vue, like creating state variables or creating effects, you just use those inside of a Pinia store, but now that store can be imported and used inside of any component.
And let's talk about hosting. I think Vue and Nuxt is like the only framework or the only major framework that doesn't have a massive company behind it. You know, like Angular has Google, React has Vercel and Facebook. Svelte doesn't have any big company behind them as well. But Vue and Nuxt doesn't, right?
Yeah, I mean, and technically, Svelte hired Rich Harris, or Vercel hired Rich Harris, but still, Svelte is not necessarily owned by
No, Svelte is
Vercel.
not a Vercel project. They're just paying for him to work on it, which is really cool.
Yeah, but that's the other thing about Vue and Nuxt. It's community driven. Of course, they have like corporate sponsors, like you can see on their site, like who sponsors them. But it's all about the community. It's all community driven. No one is paying to have certain things done. You're not gonna have a rug pull because a company decided to do things a certain way. It's all by the community, and because of that, it's very open. You can host it anywhere. If you go to integrations and then hosting, they have docs for Netlify, Vercel, AWS Amplify, Azure, Cloudflare, Dino Deploy, GitHub pages, DigitalOcean, like anywhere, and Vercel. Actually, in the course, I host the Nuxt app on Vercel, so that's possible too. But yeah, you can pretty much host it anywhere because it's built on top of Nitro and they don't have any allegiance to a particular provider. I will say there is a service called Nuxt Hub that is, I believe some of the members of the core team started to create this to kind of figure out, well, how can we make money and be open source too?
Yeah.
And it essentially configures your Cloudflare account automatically to be able to deploy a Nuxt app. And it's like a hosted service that you can use. But beyond that, it's all community.
So their Nuxt Hub, I think we talked to Daniel about this. It's not a host itself. It's just like a kind of like a flight control or what's the Laravel one? Before they had Laravel Cloud, they had, or they still have it, but basically you bring the own hosting, but the app, it just like does all the deployment and all the pointing and all the configuration and everything. So it's just a nice dashboard that you get this nice experience.
Exactly. I think the Laravel one was Laravel Forge.
Yes.
And then, Nuxt Hub, very similar. They kind of abstract away all of the nitty-gritty details of configuring Cloudflare, and then you just pay for the raw cost of whatever hosting provider.
That's good. And what database did you use in your course?
We use Drizzle with libsql, and when we're in prod, we deploy to Terso.
Beautiful. Cool. Anything you don't like about Vue or Nuxt?
Like I mentioned, having to jump between folders is something I actually got used to. Initially, I was like, I don't like this, and this is one of the reasons I might not use Nuxt again. But having since then started to build things out with TanStack and also revisited Next.js, I actually do prefer, even though I have to jump around, I do prefer the Nuxt way of doing it. I will say, we didn't talk about auto imports. And so this is one of the things that people might not like about Nuxt is by default, it sets up stuff so that it's automatically imported. So if you define a component in the components folder, you can use that throughout your app and you don't have to import it. If you define a composition function in the composables folder, like useFetch or use my custom thing, you can use it anywhere without importing.
You don't have to import it.
Don't have to import it. And that some people can find very confusing, especially if you get dropped into a larger code base. You're like, where the heck is this thing coming from? Of course, you can use go to definition. You can hover over it in the editor. It'll tell you. But that's something definitely to get used to. I personally like it. Again, the more experience I have, the more stuff I work with, I want to write less code. I want to import less. I just want things to work. So I like it. But that will be something you technically can turn it off, but a lot of the docs are using auto imports, or some of the tutorials are using auto imports. So that might be something that takes getting used to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Web components are like that as well, where you just register it and then it's just globally available, and it can be a little bit funky, especially if you don't have the tooling set up to figure out where is this thing being defined, or like you could possibly overwrite components, I guess, or is it based on the name of the file?
It uses file name. They have several conventions. So like I use kebab casing for my file names, but the convention is you instantiate them with Pascal case. So it automatically knows that because I named it that, it converts it to Pascal case. And then when I use it, I can use it that way. You technically could use it Pascal as well. Those are actually rules that I believe come from Vue.js, not Next.js, or not Nuxt. It's just the conventions for how to instantiate a component based on its name. But yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right. Well, that's super interesting. Thank you so much for laying it on us. I need to build a Nuxt app so bad. I've been thinking about it for quite a while. I almost moved my own personal site over to it.
Wow.
But I didn't do it because of JSX. I wanted to just stick with JSX. Although I think you could probably move over to JSX to Vue code pretty easily. What do you think?
You technically can use JSX in your Nuxt components, so like you can. Like you literally just call it .tsx, but all the docs are for Vue components. Everything you find about Vue is not going to show you JSX, so that's going to be an uphill battle. But technically, you can. They have a component loader, because at the end of the day, your Vue components just get turned into a render function. You can use JSX in the exact same way. So technically, if you don't want to leave JSX, you could use it.
They could, but not like React hooks or anything like that. That stuff wouldn't work. Simply just templating with JSX.
Exactly.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Make sure you check out CJ's video. Go to youtube.com/syntaxfm and watch his tutorial on Nuxt. Give it a shot and let us know what you think.
Definitely.
Peace.